Welcome, traveler in time. Before we drift into the glow of Belle Époque Paris, take a moment to get comfortable. Dim the lights. Maybe there's a soft hum in the room, a fan, or the slow rhythm of rain. This is your cue to slow down. Breathe in. If you enjoy these calm journeys through strange corners of history, you can like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy it. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's oddly soothing to see the world drifting off together. Now, let's step into another century. The year is somewhere between 1880 and 1910. You wake to the scent of anise and smoke drifting through an open window. Outside, a city of light hums beneath gas lamps, and somewhere in a Montmartre cafe, a green drink swirls in a glass. Welcome to Paris and to the uneasy haze of absinthe. You step out into the soft light of early evening Paris. Somewhere around 1895, the streets are a slow river of people, and the air hums with that unique kind of fatigue that only beauty can cause, the kind that makes you want to sit, sigh, and order something mysterious. This is La Hervert, the green hour. When everyone from bakers to bohemians finds their way to a cafe table, ready for a glass of liquid inspiration, you find a seat by the window. The marble table is cold beneath your fingers, slightly sticky from the day's heat. The waiter approaches, towel over his arm, and you order the usual, trying to sound as though you've done this before. He brings it in stages first, a short, elegant glass, clear as crystal, and filled with something that smells faintly of fennel and mischief. Next, a silver spoon, perforated like lace, then a single sugar cube, white and innocent. It's all part of the ritual. You balance the sugar on the spoon, place it across the glass, and let the waiter pour a thin stream of cold water over it. The sugar dissolves slowly, a sweet snowfall into the absinthe below. The liquid blooms from clear to cloudy, pale green, turning milky, opalescent, alive. They call this moment the louche, a word that means both shady and muddled. Paris has always loved its double meanings. You lift the glass and take your first sip. The taste is strange, bitter, herbal, with a cooling sweetness that clings to the tongue. It's like drinking spring rain that's been filtered through an apothecary's dream. Round you, people sigh and settle. A painter in a worn beret sketches a model's profile. Factory clerk stares at nothing in particular, clearly trying to forget the day. The clink of glasses and the faint hiss of a nearby gas lamp blend into a rhythm as hypnotic as the drink itself. They call it the Green Fairy, La Fille Verte. To some, she's a muse, to others a menace. You can already sense why. There's something seductive in the way the edges of the world soften, so the city is exhaled and you're floating in it. Even the chatter around you turns musical snippets of gossip. Laughter and arguments about art and politics weave together into a kind of lullaby. You glance out the window, across the boulevard. The sky is fading from pale blue to that Parisian twilight, a soft, bruised violet that painters chase but never quite catch. The lamplighter makes his slow procession, flame after flame awakening along the street. You can almost imagine the city as a living organism, stretching its glowing nerves as night arrives. A group of students nearby debates whether absinthe truly causes madness. One quotes a doctor who blames wormwood for attacking the brain. Another laughs and says the madness was there long before the bottle. Someone else insists that absinthe merely reveals what's already hidden, that it's not poison but a mirror. You sip again and wonder which of them is right. The waiter returns with more water and the ritual repeats. Each glass feels like a small performance, a ceremony of surrender. Even the most practical Parisians participate. Clerks, seamstresses, cab drivers, because for one glowing hour each day, everyone belongs to the same quiet congregation. The green hour democratizes despair, one drip at a time. As you sit there, a breeze slides through the open window, carrying scents of roasted chestnuts, cigar smoke, and damp stone. Somewhere nearby, an accordion player starts a slow tune that might be happy or sad, depending on how much you've had to drink. You think of how easily routine can become ritual, how a drink meant to calm nerves has become an emblem of art, rebellion, and a little bit of self-destruction. Your eyes wander across the cafe. A woman in pale gloves stirs her drink absent-mindedly, lost in thought. An older man leans too far over his table, mumbling to no one. A poet scribbles furiously on a napkin. Every face carries the same faint glaze, that peculiar Parisian blend of exhaustion and enlightenment. Can't tell if they're content or just temporarily detached from their troubles. Perhaps it's the same thing. Time moves strangely here. One glass becomes two, and suddenly the room feels warmer, the gaslight softer. The conversation around you blurs into something like the sound of distant waves. Even the tick of the cafe clock feels unhurried, indulgent. For a moment, you understand the appeal, not intoxication, but suspension. The green fairy doesn't make you forget, she just asks you to pause. You glance down at your half-empty glass and notice the sugar crystals clinging to the rim like frost. The liquid has turned almost white now, opaque as porcelain. It feels like you're drinking a cloud. Outside, the city has changed entirely. The light is gone, replaced by the glow of lamplight and the glitter of carriages rolling by. Somewhere, a voice rises above the hum, laughter, then a brief argument, then silence. The mood in the cafe shifts just slightly, from dreamlike to uncertain. Maybe the fairy spell is deepening, or maybe it's wearing off. You can't quite tell. You only know that everything feels both sharper and softer at once, a contradiction in a glass. Soon, you'll step outside and feel the cool air on your face. The sound of footsteps echoing against cobblestones, the night unfolding like velvet. The city that was gold and green will now shimmer in silver and shadow. You step outside into a city that seems freshly painted every evening. The last streaks of sunset are fading from coral to violet, brushed across a skyline of chimneys and domes. Below, the gas lamps flicker awake, their pale halos gliding across the cobblestones like tiny moons. The air feels soft, almost powdered, warm enough to stroll, cool enough to think, with just a faint whiff of coal smoke to remind you, this is still the 19th century. This is Belle Époque Paris, the beautiful era, and if it sounds a bit self-congratulatory, that's because it was. The city is drunk on its own brilliance. You can feel it in the streets. Wide, tree-lined boulevards built by Baron housemen, clean facades, gleaming like marble under the lamplight. Cafes overflowing with voices that refuse to go quiet. Everything here believes in progress, in electricity, in art, in the idea that beauty could last forever. You wander past a newspaper stand plastered with colorful posters. A can-can dancer grins from one corner, her skirts a blur of red and cream. An advertisement for soap promises refinement and purity in identical fonts. Even the street signs are beautiful, their enamel surfaces reflecting little pools of gaslight. Paris is always aware that it is being looked at, and it performs accordingly. In the shop windows, mannequins wear gowns made of impossible silk, shimmering under the lamps. The scent of fresh bread seeps out from a bakery. Mingling with the metallic temps of the Seine, you hear the echo of a violin somewhere, perhaps from a barge on the river, or a cafe orchestra testing its tune. Even the pigeons seem romantic. And yet, beneath this glow, something else moves, a kind of restless pulse. The artists of Montmartre call it the fever. It's the same energy that keeps them painting at 3 a.m, arguing about color theory over cheap wine, chasing beauty until it turns around and bites. Progress brings excitement, yes, but also exhaustion. The city that never sleeps begins to twitch a little at the edges. You cross into the shadow of the Opera Garnier, its stone facade alive with carved gods and winged creatures. Inside, chandeliers burn like captive suns. It's not just an opera house. It's a cathedral for the cult of elegance. Ladies in corsets and feathers descend from carriages, their laughter spilling into the street. Gentlemen adjust their gloves and pretend not to stare too hard. The orchestra begins to tune, and for a moment, even the horses seem to listen. Further along the boulevard, a different kind of show unfolds. The cabarets of Montmartre and Pigalle are lighting up, doors swinging open to reveal dancers, magicians, and singers with voices made for scandal. Posters promise that a night here could change your life, or at least your reputation. You can almost hear Toulouse-Lautrec somewhere nearby, sketching quickly on the back of a napkin while pretending to drink water. But Paris at night isn't all champagne and sequins. In the back alleys, chimney sweeps and seamstresses make their slow way home. The glow of the boulevards doesn't reach the narrow quarters, where the streets smell of cabbage, candle wax, and cheap tobacco. Here, too, absinthe glows in glasses weaker, perhaps, but poured with the same devotion. It begins, as all obsessions do, with a shimmer. A glass, translucent and innocent enough, filled with a pale green liquid that catches the light like a trapped emerald. The drink seems to glow on its own, as though it remembers sunlight even in the dim corners of Parisian cafes. They call it absinthe, but to those who love it, it's La Fée Verte, the green fairy. She is everywhere in the Belle Époque, flitting invisibly between artists, poets, and lost souls. They say she grants inspiration or madness, depending on how kindly she looks upon you that night. Her magic lies in a ritual, slow and deliberate, like a prayer. A glass, a slotted spoon laid across the rim, cube of sugar resting like a tiny offering. Then, the steady drip of cold water from a carafe or fountain, drop by drop. Each one strikes the sugar, dissolving it into cloudy ribbons that swirl down into the green. The liquid transforms, no longer clear, but milky and opalescent, as if fog were forming in the glass. This is the louche, the moment when absinthe reveals its true nature. In that milky haze, artists swear they see visions. Colors no painter could mix, melodies no composer could capture. They claim the green fairy dances just beyond the rim, laughing softly as the world begins to soften around her. She is muse, enchantress, and trickster, all at once. The story of absinthe begins long before Paris learned to love her. She was born in the Swiss mountains, a medicinal tonic made from wormwood, anise, and fennel. At first, she was a healer's brew, used to treat fevers and stomach aches. But by the time she reached France in the 1840s, she had found a new purpose: to intoxicate the imagination. Soldiers returning from the wars in Algeria brought home a taste for it. They drank absinthe to forget the heat and the dust, the violence and the boredom. Soon, cafes from Marseille to Montmartre were serving it in the late afternoons. The hour between 5 and 7 became sacred La Herverte, the green hour. By the 1890s, it wasn't just a drink. It was a ritual of belonging. The painters of Montmartre, Degas, Manet, Van Gogh, Lautrec, all had their green fairy phases. Writers like Verlaine and Rimbaud composed verses in her honor. She frees the tongue, one poet said, and unchains the dream. Yet behind her charm, there was always something a little sinister. The newspapers whispered that she caused madness. Doctors wrote stern reports about absinthism, trembling hands, hallucinations, violent tempers. Whether it was true or not didn't seem to matter. The myth was already alive. Every tragedy with a green bottle nearby became proof of her curse. You can picture her now hovering above the cafe tables of Montmartre, a pale, laughing figure with wings made of mist. She leans over painters as they work, whispering more color, more light, more truth. Sometimes she comforts them. Sometimes she dares them to go too far. Across from the artists, a young man in a shabby coat watches her with both awe and fear. His name is Jean, though he could be anyone. He came to Paris with a head full of poems and an empty purse. Now he drinks absinthe because it's cheaper than dinner and feels more like hope. As the first glass turns cloudy, he smiles faintly. After the second, he's sure he's hearing music from nowhere. The cafe is alive with conversation. Painters arguing about light, lovers whispering over tiny tables, a waiter rolling his eyes as he wipes down another glass. The smoke of cigarettes and cigars hangs low, weaving through the scent of anise and sugar. Above it all, the green fairy hovers unseen, sipping on the edge of everyone's imagination. Not everyone adores her, of course. To the moralists, she is a demon in disguise. They call her the mother of madness, the queen of misery. Posters begin to appear, showing her as a ghostly woman leading men to ruin. The more she's condemned, the more people love her, because that's what Paris does. It worships its vices as much as its virtues. As the evening deepens, the cafe lights dim and the conversations slow. Someone at the piano begins to play a waltz, slightly off-key but full of heart. Jean lifts his glass again. The fairy inside it seems to move, her wings flickering just beneath the cloudy surface. He whispers a toast to inspiration and drinks. For a moment, the room feels weightless. The edges of the world blur. Time stretches thin. He sees color where there should be shadow, hears rhythm where there should be silence. Whether it's the absinthe or something else, he doesn't know. He only knows that he's found her that strange green muse who makes everything seem possible. Outside, Paris keeps breathing, the hum of carriages, the distant toll of a church bell, the soft hiss of the gas lamps. But inside the cafe, the green fairy reigns supreme. Her kingdom is built not of gold or marble, but of imagination and illusion. And tonight, as the glasses clink and laughter fades, she claims a few more hearts for herself. She will visit again tomorrow and the next day and the next until the whole city sways in her rhythm. For now, she drifts quietly back into the bottle, smiling. But her spell is only beginning. You find yourself in a Paris cafe just before sunset. Not one of the glittering boulevards for the rich, but a smaller one. Tucked behind a cobbled street that smells faintly of rain, tobacco, and wet bread. The sign above the door is faded, the floorboards uneven, and the waiter perpetually unimpressed. And yet, this is where the world is changing. Slowly, with arguments, with laughter, and with far too much absinthe. The tables are small and close together, packed with the self-declared geniuses of the Belle Époque. They are writers, painters, anarchists, dreamers, and most dangerously, people who think too much after midnight. The cafe is their temple, and the absinthe glass, their communion cup. Here sits Toulouse-Lautrec, tiny and sharp as a matchstick, sketching the regulars with a speed that borders on supernatural. His pencil never pauses, even as his other hand raises the glass to his lips. Across from him, a young Picasso listens to every word, not yet famous, still pretending to understand the jokes. Near the window, Verlaine argues with a poet whose name history has politely forgotten. They debate whether suffering makes art, or whether art simply makes better suffering. No one wins. No one ever does. The air inside the cafe is thick, part smoke, part perfume, part something sweetly rotten. Someone plays a violin in the corner, out of tune but defiantly passionate. The sound competes with the clatter of spoons, the hiss of gas lamps, and the murmur of French phrases too poetic to translate. You sit quietly among them, unseen, watching how the green fairy works her nightly spell. She doesn't appear as a ghost this time, as she's in the flicker of the lamps, in the rhythm of conversation, in the faint trembling of a writer's hand as he reaches for another sip. She hums softly beneath the noise, a melody no one can quite remember in the morning. Every cafe has its prophets, people who believe they are speaking for the age. They sit upright, their eyes gleaming with sincerity and a touch of delirium. They announce, often loudly, that Paris is the center of the universe, that art will save mankind. And that civilization, tragically, is being destroyed by people who don't appreciate good verse. One man declares that poetry must be written under the influence of absinthe, otherwise it lacks divine chaos. Another insists that absinthe kills the soul, and that real inspiration comes from bread, coffee, and heartbreak. Yes. You suspect both are right, and both are very wrong. A woman in emerald silk, one of those modern women who smoke scandalously in public, recites lines of Baudelaire between drags of her cigarette. One must be drunk, she says, on wine, on poetry, or on virtue as you please. She laughs and adds, but never sober. Outside, the gas lamps flicker to life, throwing thin light through the window panes. You can see the reflection of the cafe crowd, mirrored in the glass, a blur of faces, smoke, and motion. To anyone passing by, it might look like madness, but inside it feels like destiny. These people believe they are building something, a movement, a revolution of imagination. They don't know yet that the world will soon call them legends. To them, they're just surviving another night with too much thought and too little money. Someone shouts from the back a toast to art, to freedom, to the absurdity of it all. Glasses rise. Sugar dissolves, the fairy swirls. You take a sip and feel the warmth slide through you, strange and slow. Time begins to loosen its grip. The voices blur into a single hum, passionate, desperate, alive. There's an odd comfort in the chaos. You start to understand that the cafe prophets aren't wrong, not entirely. The green fairy gives them courage to say what they truly think, to paint what no one else dares to see. She loosens the tongues of poets and opens the eyes of painters, though sometimes she forgets to close them again. Still, not all prophecies are bright ones. In a corner near the door, a journalist scribbles notes, his brow furrowed. He's writing about the Absinthe menace, about how France is being destroyed one green glass at a time. To him, these dreamers aren't visionaries, they're evidence. Proof that the nation's best minds are dissolving into delusion. But the prophets keep talking. They're too enchanted to notice the tide turning. For them, the cafe is the whole world, a little universe of smoke and sugar, passion and paint. If the outside world disapproves, that's fine. They'll outlast it, or so they think. As the night wears on, the conversations soften. Someone falls asleep at the table. Another hums a half-remembered song. Lautrec's sketchbook closes with a sigh. If you follow the quiet clink of glassware and the murmur of French humming, you'll find yourself in a cramped shop along the Rue Santana. It smells of licorice, anise, and something faintly bitter. Inside, a man in a starched white coat adjusts his spectacles and pours clear liquid into a curved glass flask. His hands are steady, reverent, like a priest performing mass. He is a pharmacist, and he is making absinthe. This is not magic, though it certainly feels like it. It's chemistry, a precise and dangerous kind. Wormwood, an herb with a wild name and wilder effects, is steeped with green anise and fennel, then distilled into a spirit strong enough to make a mule nostalgic. To this shimmering elixir, the pharmacist adds secret ingredients, hyssop for color, melissa for scent, and some whisper a few things best left unnamed. The liquid glows faintly green, almost gold at its edges. The color of madness, he says with a smile. You can't tell if he's joking. Absinthe began, long ago, as medicine. Soldiers drank it to disinfect their water. Housewives took drops for indigestion and melancholy. It was supposed to sharpen the mind, to soothe the spirit. But like many good intentions in history, it evolved. Parisian pharmacists, always eager for a challenge or a profit, began refining recipes until medicine turned to pleasure, and pleasure turned to obsession. In the early days, these pharmacists were proud artisans. Each had his own secret recipe, whispered down apprenticeships like family heirlooms. Some kept their wormwood ratio high, courting infamy. Others blended more anise, aiming for smoothness and style. Labels became symbols of status: Pernod, Edouard, Terminus. To the untrained eye, it was just liquor. To the initiated, it was art in liquid form. But purity was expensive, and demand was endless. As absinthe fever spread from artists to factory workers, the pharmacist's art began to cheapen. Street vendors and unlicensed distillers started brewing their own versions, cutting wormwood with copper sulfate to make the color greener, or adding lead compounds for sparkle, a bargain for a sou and a slow death for the drinker. The pharmacist you're watching knows this. He frowns as he measures a few drops of essence into the bottle. They blame the drink, he mutters, but it's the poison they mix into it. He's right. In a way, absinthe itself wasn't the killer its reputation claimed. It was greed, and the shortcuts of men who thought beauty could be bottled without consequence. He sets the finished bottle on the counter. The sunlight filters through it, throwing a pale green pattern across the tiles. It's oddly beautiful, a kind of gentle menace you can't look away from. Moderation, he says softly. It's the forgotten ingredient. You imagine the bottle making its way across Paris, perhaps to a poet's flat in Montmartre, or a dancer's dressing room in Pigalle, perhaps to a soldier on leave, seeking warmth against the memory of battle. Wherever it goes, it carries the pharmacist's ghostly fingerprint, a silent reminder of science twisted into art and art blurred into addiction. Outside, a cart rattles by, loaded with barrels bound for a cafe. The scent of anise lingers in the air, sweet and unsettling. You think of the cafe prophets, how they worship the drink without knowing its lineage. If they could see this shop, this quiet, clinical place where beauty begins with bitterness, perhaps they'd drink more carefully. But they won't. They never do. Paris has fallen in love with the green spirit, and love rarely listens to reason. The pharmacist watches you linger in the doorway. Do you drink it? He asks, curious. You hesitate. Feels like a test. Only sometimes, you reply. He nods, satisfied as if that answer means you might survive. As you step back into the street, you catch a final glimpse of him bottling another batch, humming faintly under his breath. The sunlight strikes the shelves, lighting hundreds of tiny emerald reflections on the walls. It looks like a cathedral built of glass, fragile, luminous, doomed to shatter. The bottle he just finished will soon be in someone's hand. Perhaps a painter seeking vision, perhaps a laborer trying to forget, or perhaps in the hand of a man whose name will soon fill the newspapers. A man whose crime will turn the green fairy from muse to monster. The green fairy doesn't conquer Paris with violence or fear. She arrives politely, one glass at a time. No revolutions, no proclamations. It's just a gentle swirl of green in a crystal tumbler, and the faint perfume of anise drifting through an open cafe door. By the late 19th century, absinthe has slipped from the margins of art and medicine into the bloodstream of daily life. You can feel her everywhere now. In the mornings when factory bells ring across the working districts, men gather at small zinc counters to drink a pail. Watered-down absinthe before the day's grind. It's called the premier verre, the first glass, a quiet fortification before the noise of labor begins. Later, as the heat settles in and the streets fill with dust and shouting, the bars swell again. The ritual repeats, each sip a promise that life's chaos might briefly make sense. By late afternoon, Paris glows green. Cafe terraces are crowded, painters with stained cuffs, clerks with inked fingers, actresses wearing smiles they don't feel. Sound of spoons tapping against glass is everywhere, a delicate, rhythmic clinking that might as well be the city's heartbeat. People call this hour Le Hervert, the green hour, though by now it stretches well past twilight. You might think it's an indulgence of the bohemians, the dreamers of Montmartre, but absinthe is democratic. It belongs to everyone. To the bourgeois gentleman with his polished cane, to the seamstress with tired eyes, to the soldier with trembling hands. It offers escape without judgment, a universal passport to somewhere softer. You watch a young woman at a corner table pour water over a sugar cube balanced on her spoon. The sugar melts slowly, clouds swirling through the glass like mist over a river. Her movements are careful, almost reverent. It's not just a drink, it's ceremony, a brief, beautiful pause in the day. For some, that pause becomes the only thing worth waiting for. The cafes feed the habit. Posters bloom across the city, bright fantastical advertisements showing fairies dancing, poets dreaming, women reclining in halos of emerald smoke. Absinthe isn't just liquor now. It's lifestyle, rebellion, enlightenment in liquid form. Each poster promises something a little different. Sophistication, inspiration, courage. Absinthe, one reads, makes the heart grow wise. You suspect the opposite might also be true. In the working-class districts, the fairy's magic begins to fade. The drink grows cheaper, rougher, more dangerous. Distillers cut corners. Copper and lead find their way into the barrels. What began as ritual becomes necessity, a daily anesthetic for exhaustion. You can smell it in the air near the factories, sweat, smoke, and that strange sweetness of wormwood clinging to everything. Evenings blur into each other. The streets outside the bars shine slick with spilt liquor. Someone sings a slurred tune about love and revolution. A policeman dozes under a lamp, his head nodding in rhythm to the song. The fairy drifts through it all, invisible, patient, amused. She's not cruel exactly, just indifferent. Like any spirit of habit, she doesn't choose her devotees. She only waits for them to forget how to stop. And they do forget. You begin to notice it in the faces, the hollow eyes, the twitch of a hand that's poured too many glasses. Painters start to paint the fairy herself, not as muse, but as haunting. Degas sketches her sitting alone, pale and lost, her glass untouched. He calls it labsinthe. The critics are scandalized. not by her despair, but by her realism. What? Too much truth in a single frame, perhaps. You start to wonder when indulgence quietly crosses into dependence, when one becomes many, when comfort becomes hunger. Paris, of course, isn't asking. It's too busy pouring. The cafes keep glowing. The green hour stretches longer, later deeper into the night. By now, the ferry has become part of the city's rhythm, as much a fixture as the gaslights or the Seine. To be Parisian is to drink her. To refuse her is almost unpatriotic. Newspapers praise her for creativity. Doctors warn of madness. Both sides are correct in their own way. You pass a bar where a man sits slumped over his glass, his hands trembling slightly. The waiter doesn't seem concerned. He's seen this before. We'll see it again tomorrow. Behind him, a new customer enters, calling cheerfully for another round. The ferry never rests. The summer of 1905 drifts across the French-Swiss border. Heavy with the smell of hay and hot iron, the village of Comogny seems a world away from Paris. Quiet, green and polite, the sort of place where cows outnumber people and nothing much ever happens. You can almost hear the hum of bees over the wheat fields. But one August morning, that peace curdles into something else entirely. You wake in the Story-esque middle in a farmhouse kitchen where the air smells faintly of coffee, sweat, and old grief. The man at the table is Jean Lanfray, a Swiss laborer, strong and sunburned, with the dull, stubborn look of someone who works too hard and sleeps too little. There's a glass in front of him. You already know what's inside. He's had 2 absinthes that morning. Nothing unusual, he'd tell you if you could ask. It's just enough to clear the head. But absinthe isn't all he's had. There's been wine, there's been brandy, and more wine. A cascade of green and red, one after another, until the edges blur. By the time the sun sets behind the Jura Mountains, Lanfray will have become both legend and cautionary tale. No one knows the exact moment when his temper turns. Perhaps it's after a quarrel with his wife over dinner. Perhaps it's simply fatigue, the sort that piles up in layers until it bursts. What is certain is what comes next. A gun, a scream, a silence that spreads like spilled ink across the little village. By morning, 3 people are dead. Lanfray's pregnant wife, his 2 daughters, and a 4th wounded. It's a horror that stuns even the hardened farmers who arrive first at the scene. The police drag Lanfray from his barn, drunk, weeping, muttering something about the green ferry whispering in his ear. The newspapers arrive before the bodies are buried. Absinthe, Tuesday, absinthe kills. The headline spreads faster than the story itself. Within hours, journalists and moralists alike are already writing their sermons. Paris reads the news with morbid fascination. A family destroyed by absinthe. It's perfect, really? Too perfect? The green fairy, once muse of art and rebellion, becomes an instant villain. You can almost hear the clatter of typewriters echoing across cafe tables, the ink bleeding like accusation. They describe the murder in lurid detail. The glass of green liquor, the trembling hand, the flash of madness. Few mention the brandy, the wine, the exhaustion, the poverty. It's not a story about a man anymore. It's a story about a drink. In the cafes, people whisper, "Did you hear? He only had 2 glasses. 2, such a manageable number, so easily remembered, so terrifyingly small." A priest preaches that absinthe is the devil's sacrament. A doctor claims the wormwood oil corrodes the brain. Housewives pour their husbands' bottles down the drain, watching the green swirl vanish like guilt. Lanfray becomes a ghost before he even dies. The trial is quick, brutal, and strangely theatrical. The courtroom is packed. Journalists, moral reformers, curious spectators. You imagine the smell, ink, sweat, starch, and faint traces of anise. Lanfray sits pale and silent, his hands folded, his eyes empty. He doesn't deny the crime. He can't explain it either. The prosecutor raises the absinthe bottle before the jury, like evidence of original sin. He calls it the green poison, the distiller of demons, the seed of murder. Each phrase lands like a stone in the river of public fear. Science barely enters the room. Morality takes the stand instead. When the verdict comes, guilty, no one is surprised. Lanfray is sentenced to life imprisonment, though he will not serve it. Within days, he hangs himself in his cell, leaving behind a note that no one bothers to translate carefully. By the time it reaches the newspapers, the words have already been shaped into legend. The fairy made me do it, And just like that, the myth hardens. The green fairy, muse of poets and painters, becomes the harbinger of madness and death. Posters are torn down. The cafe owners whisper about switching to wine. Pharmacists quietly lock away their recipes. You might think Paris would pause to consider the complexity, the mix of drink, despair, and circumstance. But history doesn't do nuance well when scandal tastes this sweet. People prefer villains they can pour into a glass. The cafes, though still full, begin to change. There's a nervousness now in every pore. The same sound that once symbolized joy, the clink of spoon against glass, starts to sound like a countdown.
Paris has always loved a scandal, especially one that can be discussed over a glass. In the weeks following the murders in Communie, the city's cafes hum with a new and uneasy energy. Newspapers lie open beside cups of coffee and saucers of green-tinted absinthe, their headlines screaming in bold black type. The Green Fairy kills, murder and madness by absinthe, a drink possessed by the devil. The truth, as always, is quieter, but no one wants quiet. The presses in Montmartre and along the Seine run day and night, churning out paper by the ton, the smell of ink thick as smoke. Every hour brings another article, each one bloodier, louder, more certain than the last. The facts are few, but fear is plentiful, and fear sells. Some stories describe the Communie farmhouse as if the reporters had been there. The overturned table, the crying child, the shattered bottle. Others invent details entirely, the fairy herself appearing in a green mist, whispering to Lanfray before the shots rang out. It's part journalism, part theater, and the public laps it up. In smoky reading rooms and behind the zinc counters of cafes, Parisians read aloud the more lurid lines to each other. Did you hear? He drank only 2 glasses. The number repeats like a curse. 2 glasses, small enough to make anyone nervous about their own habits. The bourgeoisie, ever fond of moral panic, find a new crusade. Pamphlets are printed declaring absinthe the national plague. A doctor claims it rots the brain from the inside out. Another insists it corrodes the soul. Priests thunder from the pulpit that the Green Fairy is the devil's consort, seducing France away from decency and faith. But the loudest voices belong to the papers themselves, each one racing to outdo the other in drama. The petty journal publishes a front-page illustration, a demon in a green dress hovering over a sleeping drunkard, whispering into his ear. The illustration de Paris depicts the same demon leading a man by the hand into a grave. Every morning, those pictures appear in windows across the city. Children stop to stare. Housewives shudder. Artists, who once toasted the fairy as muse and friend, begin to lower their glasses in public. The panic spreads like spilled ink. Politicians, sensing opportunity, take up the cause. At first, their speeches sound cautious, calls for further study and responsible consumption. But soon they swell with moral thunder. We must protect France from this poison. We must save our sons from madness and our daughters from ruin. In drawing rooms and salons, guests discuss absinthe as if it were a contagion. Have you seen how it makes them tremble? Someone whispers. It steals their sight, says another. My cousin's friend went blind after drinking it. Stories multiply faster than anyone can trace. Meanwhile, the cafe owners grumble in private. They know their business depends on the very thing the papers are turning into a monster. They keep pouring, but more discreetly now. The absinthe fountain is moved to the corner, away from the windows. The word absinthe is written smaller on the menu, sometimes replaced with green aperitif. Still, the regulars come. The painters, the poets, the dreamers. They pretend not to notice the glares. They whisper that the newspapers exaggerate, that this hysteria will pass. But even they can feel the shift. There's a new tension in every sip, the sense that the fairy, once beloved, is being hunted. In Montparnasse, an old journalist named Emile watches the frenzy with weary amusement. The press has always needed a villain, he says to a young reporter. Yesterday it was cholera. Today it's the bottle. Tomorrow who knows? The younger man, eyes bright with ambition, replies, yes, but this one glows green. It sells, and it does sell. Each new edition vanishes from the kiosks before noon. The story is too good, art, murder, madness, morality, all bottled in a single glass. Behind the noise, a few scientists begin to mutter that the evidence is weak, that absinthe's effects are no worse than brandy's, but their papers are buried deep inside the journals no one reads. What matters isn't the truth. What matters is the feeling, that invisible pulse of collective fear beating through the city. You can almost see Paris holding its breath, its cafes still glowing green in the evening light, while the presses clatter without pause. Every headline is another nail in the fairy's coffin.
You can almost smell the shift away from ink and outrage, toward laboratories that reek faintly of alcohol, ether, and ambition. After the panic in the press, the doctors of France do what doctors do best: argue. It begins quietly enough, in medical journals that few outside their circle ever read. But by 1900, the debate over absinthe has become a national obsession. It's not just for drinkers and politicians, but for men in white coats who see in the green fairy either a demon to exorcise or a misunderstood muse. In lecture halls from Paris to Lyon, physicians gather under gaslight, waving their notes like sabers. Some claim absinthe leads to madness, convulsions, even spontaneous violence, citing cases of trembling hands, haunted eyes, and fits of rage. Others counter that the evidence is pure melodrama, born not from science, but from gossip and exaggeration. The problem, of course, is that the truth sits somewhere in the middle, quietly ignored. You find yourself in one of these meetings, perhaps at the Sorbonne, or in a drafty provincial hospital, the walls lined with shelves of cloudy glass jars. The air smells of camphor and chalk. One doctor stands, clearing his throat. He's thin, his mustache fierce, his voice righteous. He begins by reading the headline everyone knows. Absinthe turns men into beasts. He insists it's no mere metaphor. Gentlemen, he declares, we have proof of what I call absinthism, a distinct and terrible malady. He holds up his evidence. A chart showing nervous disorders, hallucinations, seizures, and murders linked somehow, loosely to the green drink. The audience nods gravely. It feels scientific. Numbers, after all, are comforting, even when they lie a little. Then another doctor rises. His waistcoat is wrinkled. His patience, thinner than his hair. Absinthe, he scoffs. Nonsense. It's the alcohol, not the wormwood. A drunk is a drunk, whatever is poison. The room murmurs. Papers rustle. Someone coughs dramatically. And so the dance continues. Experiment versus experiment. Anecdote versus anecdote. One side blames thujone, the chemical compound in wormwood, for provoking insanity. The other insists that any drink consumed by the leader will ruin a man regardless of what plant it was steeped in. A few try to split the difference. They propose moderation, a word few in Belle Époque Paris understand. Behind the debate, though, lies something deeper: anxiety. France has seen waves of addiction before, from opium dens to cheap brandy. But absinthe feels different. It's too poetic, too symbolic. It's the drink. even as the doctors debate under flickering lamps and the press fans its headlines into hysteria. Paris's creative class continues to sip their cloudy glass in defiance. You find yourself drifting into that other world. Not the world of science, but of smudged canvases, cigarette smoke, and half-forgotten dreams. It's the studio at dawn, the cafe at midnight, the city caught in that hour between creation and collapse. This is the fog of art, literal and figurative. The air is thick with turpentine, pipe smoke, and the faint herbal perfume of absinthe. You can barely see the outlines of faces through it all. Poets staring into their glasses as if they were mirrors. Painters mixing green pigments that accidentally match the drink, and musicians trying to remember whether they've written their melody or only imagined it. Absinthe is not just a beverage here. It's part of the atmosphere, like the haze that hangs over Montmartre in the morning.
What?
It's the unofficial currency of inspiration, traded in sips and metaphors. If you can't afford a studio, you can afford a glass. If you can't buy fame, you can buy forgetfulness. Sit among them, perhaps at the Café du Tambourin or at the Le Pin Agile, the walls covered in paintings left as payment for drinks. A violin hums somewhere in the background. Someone sketches a profile on a napkin and declares it art, which in this decade is just barely true. Around you, laughter rises and falls like the smoke from galloises. Everyone is brilliant, or at least pretending to be. They call absinthe la muse verte, the green muse. It promises clarity through distortion, the way fog softens a harsh streetlight. For some, it really does spark visions. Van Gogh paints his yellow night skies with a tremor that feels alive. Degas captures dancers who seem to move even when they stand still. Toulouse-Lautrec draws the faces of cabaret performers weary, glowing, human, and signs his name with a flourish that might be defiance or exhaustion. But inspiration and addiction are difficult roommates. The same fog that blurs the edges of genius also hides the cliffs beneath it. You can almost feel the weight of it pressing on your temples, the slow slide from revelation to repetition. The more one drinks for inspiration, the less inspired one becomes, until the muse stops visiting altogether. Still, there's something romantic about the danger. Paris has always had a weakness for tragedy and good lighting. Poets joke about dying for art over breakfast, and then order another glass by dinner. They are young, and the city loves them for it. The green fairy is less a poison here, and more a badge, a symbol of living intensely, of refusing to be ordinary. If you listen closely, though, there are moments of honesty. Late at night, when the music dies down and the laughter fades, someone will murmur about sleeplessness or the tremor in their hands, or the dreams that don't feel quite like dreams anymore. But then the fog thickens again, and the conversation drifts away, replaced by a joke or a toast. Outside, the city glows. Electric street lamps are new. In Paris, the city of light gleams like a stage set. You walk down cobblestones slick with rain, past the glow of cafe windows. Every one of them is filled with silhouettes, laughter, and that faint, unmistakable green hue. Somewhere behind the laughter and invention, though, you sense a kind of collective fatigue. Too many nights blurred into one another. Too many mornings arrive too soon. It's as if the whole generation is caught in a beautiful, exhausting dream, one that can't last forever. You pause before a gallery window. Behind the glass stands a painting of a dancer, frozen mid-spin, her dress a whirl of greenish white. The brushstrokes are quick, nervous, alive. You can tell the painter drank while working, not because it's sloppy, but because it vibrates, like art made on the edge of something dangerous. The artists don't see themselves as victims or heroes. They see themselves as explorers. Absinthe is their map, their compass, and their fog all at once. But fog, as you know, always lifts. By the time the artists have painted their fogs and the doctors have filled their notebooks, the politicians begin to stir. You can almost hear it, the creak of leather chairs, the shuffle of papers, the muttering in the corridors of the French Parliament. It's as though the green fairy has floated up from the cafes and slipped quietly under the chamber doors. And now, the lawmakers of France in their stiff collars and uneasy dignity must decide what to do about her. They begin not with outrage but with curiosity, the sort that never bodes well. Reports are requested. Committees are formed. Men with mustaches as grand as their titles read statements about public health and the moral fiber of the Republic. The words sound noble, though most of them haven't set foot in a working-class tavern in decades. You sit in the gallery high above the floor, where the air smells of ink, paper, and the faint cologne of ambition. Below, a minister waves a copy of La Matin, the latest story about a crime committed under the influence of absinthe. He slams it onto the desk for effect. Heads nod solemnly. There's talk of degeneration, of national decline, of France drinking itself into decay one glass at a time. But beneath all the rhetoric, there's something familiar. Politics is theater. Absinthe is no longer a drink, it's a symbol. To condemn it is to appear virtuous. To defend it is to seem reckless, immoral, perhaps even unpatriotic. Few politicians can resist the opportunity to be seen saving the nation from itself. Still, not all are convinced. A handful of deputies, usually from wine-producing regions, smirk quietly as their colleagues dramatize the crisis. They know the real enemy isn't wormwood, it's competition. Absinthe, after all, has stolen a sizable share of the nation's thirst. For every cafe serving the green drink, fewer bottles of Bordeaux are being uncorked. A convenient moral panic, then, might just serve economic interests as well as moral ones. In one corner, you spot a particularly shrewd parliamentarian from Burgundy, his pockets, no doubt lined with vineyard loyalty. When he speaks, his voice drips with sincerity. "We must protect the people," he declares, "from the poison that preys upon their virtue." No one mentions that his family's wine estate has been struggling since the absinthe boom began. Legislation is proposed, debated, delayed, redrafted. Some suggest limiting production. Others want to regulate ingredients. The most zealous demand a total ban. It's the source of madness, crime, and ruin. One senator proclaims, his hand trembling, perhaps from conviction, perhaps from caffeine. The newspapers, sensing blood in the water, report every speech with glee. Caricatures bloom overnight, green-skinned women dragging men to their doom, devils pouring absinthes into rivers, noble lawmakers shielding fragile maidens from corruption. It's propaganda, yes, but it's beautiful propaganda, and it works. Soon, the temperance leagues march in the streets. Teachers warn children about the drink that devours fathers. Priests thunder from pulpits. Even cafe owners, nervous about inspections, begin quietly replacing absinthe bottles with wine and beer. You can feel the shift, a subtle tightening of the social corset. What was once a nightly ritual now carries the faint shame of disobedience. Inside Parliament, the debate grows fiercer. Statistics, sometimes real, often invented, are waved in the air. 1 in every 10 cases of insanity, a speaker claims dramatically, can be traced to absinthe. Someone else adds, "It makes men forget God and duty." The chamber hums with indignation. You imagine the green fairy herself hovering invisibly over the assembly, amused. They speak of her as if she were a person, seductive, dangerous, foreign. Never mind that she's mostly alcohol, herbs, and myth. She's been transformed into the perfect villain, intoxicating enough to blame, intangible enough to never defend herself. Once the green fairy has been chased from Paris, the city does what it has always done best. It adapts. Prohibition, it turns out, is not the end of indulgence, only the start of innovation. If you listen closely, you can still hear the clinking of glasses in cafes, a low hum of conversation, the sighs of drinkers pretending that what they're sipping tastes almost the same. Almost. After all, no law can erase the habits of a nation that has built its afternoons around ritual. So, when absinthe disappears, substitutes rise up like clever impostors at a masked ball, similar enough to pass at a glance, but never quite the same when you lean closer. First comes pastis, bright and herbal, proudly French but safely legal. It smells of anise, like absinthe's well-behaved cousin, the one who still gets invited to family dinners. Its makers boast that it's a cleaner drink, less mystical, more respectable. You can buy it openly without guilt. In a glass, it clouds the same way when you add water, and for a brief, bittersweet second, the illusion works. Then there's anisette, sweet and perfumed. Favored by those who don't actually miss absinthe, but do miss the social permission to linger in cafes. It's the drink of polite conversation, not passion, a replacement for the rebel's ritual. You sip it slowly, knowing it will never make you see the world differently, but at least it won't get you arrested. In back rooms and small towns, though, the experiments grow stranger. Some distillers toy with wormwoodless formulas, mixing in mint or star anise. Others disguise absinthe entirely, bottling it under false names like herbal tonic or digestive. The bottles circulate quietly through whispers, through winked exchanges, through the kind of networks that once smuggled banned books. You find yourself in a narrow bar one evening, a place that smells of smoke, citrus, and something faintly illicit. The bartender, a man with a mustache too fine for his job, slides you a glass. It's pale yellow, not green, and yet as you lift it to the light, the liquid swirls with that old, familiar shimmer. "Just past us," he says, though his eyes say otherwise. You take a sip. It burns less, but haunts more. Across the city, people make peace with substitutes in their own ways. The poets move on to coffee, claiming enlightenment through caffeine instead of wormwood. The painters turn to wine, softer but sufficient. The philosophers, naturally, claim they were never intoxicated by anything but ideas. Still, at certain tables, at certain hours, there is a pause in the conversation, a quiet moment where someone glances at their drink and remembers how the green once looked in the lamplight. What no one admits aloud is that it's not the absinthe they miss, but what it represented, that fragile illusion of control over chaos, the sense that beauty and madness could coexist in the same glass. The substitutes are safer, yes, but safety, you notice, has a dull aftertaste. Meanwhile, France's vineyards bloom again. The wine industry, rescued by moral panic, celebrates a golden age. Advertisements praise the honest drink of the people. Posters show smiling families around tables. The father pouring Bordeaux instead of absinthe, as though virtue could be bottled and sold by the crate. The irony, of course, is that wine consumption quietly climbs higher than ever. France has rid itself of one intoxicant only to embrace another, this time with government approval. In cafes, the old absinthe spoons disappear from tabletops, replaced by teaspoons and saucers. The fountains that once dripped cold water over sugar cubes gather dust in back rooms, relics of a decadent past. Collectors begin to hoard them, the way some people keep love letters, not for use, but for remembrance. And yet, even in this cleaner, safer Paris, the myth refuses to die. You hear it in the way older drinkers talk wistfully, conspiratorially. They describe absinthe not as a flavor, but as a feeling. It wasn't just the drink, one man tells you, his voice soft. It was the time, the music, the light. You nod, because you understand every generation buries its enchantments and later digs them up, hoping to find themselves inside. So the substitutes multiply, each one chasing the ghost of the green fairy, but none quite catching her. They imitate the ritual, the color, even the poetry, but never the madness. Without that shimmer of danger, without that sense that you might be sipping something forbidden, the spell cannot hold. And yet, paradoxically, the legend of absinthe only grows stronger in her absence. Writers abroad romanticize her. Painters immortalize her in green-tinted portraits. Tourists whisper her name as though invoking a lost lover. The band that was meant to bury her instead makes her immortal. Time has a curious way of forgiving what panic once condemned. Decades pass, wars come and go. The Eiffel Tower rusts and is repainted, again and again. Paris modernizes its boulevards gleam with neon lights instead of gas lamps. The cafes hum with espresso machines rather than the slow drip of absinthe fountains. The old rituals fade into nostalgia. The green fairy becomes a rumor, a ghost that occasionally flutters through stories of the mad old days. But ghosts have a way of coming back when the world forgets to be afraid of them. It begins quietly, as these things often do. A few historians, somewhere in the 1980s, start to wonder whether absinthe was ever truly guilty of the crimes laid at her green feet. They dust off old medical journals, pore over prohibition records, and realize something curious. There is almost no scientific proof that absinthe was dangerous in the way people claimed. The so-called absinthe madness had been more moral hysteria than medical fact, a convenient villain for an anxious society. One chemist measures the actual fusion, the chemical once blamed for hallucinations, and discovers it exists in such small amounts it could hardly drive a mouse to madness, let alone a poet. It was the alcohol, he concludes. Just ... the alcohol. It's the same kind that fills wine bottles and whiskey glasses everywhere. And so, the Green Fairy's ghost begins to stir. You can picture it, a dim laboratory, perhaps in Switzerland, where absinthe was born. Someone uncorks a bottle based on a 19th century recipe. Watches as the pale green liquid glimmers under fluorescent light. They add water. The cloud forms soft and milky, like fog curling through memory. The aroma rises, wormwood, anise, fennel, and suddenly the decades between the Belle Époque and now seem to dissolve. In that instant, the fairy returns. By the early 2000s, absinthe quietly begins its comeback, first in Europe, then across the Atlantic. At first, it's treated as a novelty, a curiosity for cocktail enthusiasts and history nerds. But soon, bars start offering green hour specials again. Modern glass fountains appear on marble counters. Bartenders with waxed mustaches resurrect the ritual, dripping ice water slowly over sugar cubes as if performing a small sacred play. You sit in one such bar, and for a moment, it's easy to forget you're in the 21st century. The music hums softly, candles flicker, and someone nearby swears they can taste history itself. The fairy hasn't just returned, she's reinvented herself, gliding effortlessly from myth to marketing. Of course, her reputation remains complicated. Old warnings still echo, journalists still raise eyebrows, governments still regulate thujan levels with bureaucratic precision. But now, there's also reverence. What was once scandalous is now sophisticated. What was dangerous is now artisanal. 100 years ago, absinthe was blamed for madness. Today, it's served in crystal glasses with tasting notes. That's the human pattern, isn't it? We demonize what we don't understand, and then, once the fear fades, we romanticize it. We turn warnings into decor and tragedy into aesthetic, and you see it in every generation. The things once outlawed often become the very symbols of culture. In some ways, the new absinthe revival is less about the drink itself and more about longing. A longing for the days when art felt dangerous, when cafes smelled of risk and rebellion, when people still believed that intoxication might lead to enlightenment. The Green Fairy, reborn, now stands as a symbol of nostalgia, not for madness, but for magic. You can find her now in Paris again, in Montmartre, where tourists sip the glowing liquid beneath framed posters of Lautrec and Degas. She's in Prague, where bartenders set sugar cubes on fire for effect, a ritual no 19th century Frenchman would recognize, but no one seems to mind. And she's in New Orleans, San Francisco, Tokyo, each place adding its own twist, its own myth, its own shade of green. She's no longer feared, no longer banned, but never quite ordinary either. Every sip carries a whisper of that century-old scandal of poets and painters and madness and beauty. And perhaps that's why she endures. Absinthe isn't really about flavor, but about story. If you hold the glass up to the light, you'll see it, a shimmer of something impossible to define. A color that isn't quite green, not quite gold. The reflection of a myth that refused to die. You take a slow sip. The licorice note spreads across your tongue. It's sharp, bitter, alive. Somewhere between past and present, you can almost hear the laughter of the old cafes. Night falls differently in Montmartre, not like a curtain closing, but more like a slow spill of ink, soft and deliberate, flowing down the cobbled streets and the worn stairways that twist up toward Sacre. See her. The tourists go home, the souvenir stalls shutter their tin doors, and the hill exhales. The old stones, the same ones that felt the boots of painters, poets, and pickpockets, seem to hum with something familiar, like an aftertaste of music. You walk there now, in the quiet hour after midnight. The air smells faintly of wine and rain, of plaster and time. Every corner feels haunted, but not unhappily so. These are not the ghosts that frighten. They are the ones that linger because they still have stories to tell. Montmartre was once the ragged heart of Paris's rebellion, cheap rent, cheaper absinthe, and a view of the whole city glittering below like an idea just out of reach. The Green Fairy lived here, in her truest form, moving from cafe to cafe, glass to glass, muse to muse. And though the drink itself vanished for nearly a century, her ghosts never really left. They became part of the landscape, hiding in the murals, the peeling posters, and the walls of bars that still hum with the faint trace of laughter. If you listen closely, you might hear them. Scratch of a pencil in a notebook, the click of a glass on marble. Someone saying, "Encore une, pour l'inspiration." One more for inspiration. You imagine them the great ghosts of Montmartre, Toulouse-Lautrec, with his cane tapping out the tempo of a song no one remembers. Modigliani sketching portraits in the half-light, trading them for a meal he can't quite afford, and a dozen nameless poets who believe that misery and brilliance were two sides of the same coin. They sit with you in the quiet now, invisible companions, their outlines traced in green smoke and nostalgia. Absinthe had always been more than a drink here. It was a symbol, a secret password into a world that promised art could justify poverty, that beauty could excuse chaos. It was an excuse to dream in color, even when the world was gray. That spirit, that need to blur the edges between life and art, still hums through Montmartre today. You pass the old Lapin Agile Cabaret, its signs still swinging gently in the wind. Inside, you can hear a few chords from a guitar, a voice half laughing through a shung song older than the building itself. This place once hosted Picasso, Renoir, Utrillo, men who painted hunger and heartbreak, and the crooked joy of being alive. The tables have been replaced, the absinthe long gone from the menu, but something of that green light remains. It flickers in the lamplight, it glows faintly in the reflections on a puddle, lingers in the way the wind carries the smell of sugar and smoke. The ghosts don't frighten you, they seem almost proud. Proud that their little hill of madness and art survived the world's attempts to civilize it. Proud that people still climb the same steps they once staggered down, still tilt their heads at the same views of the same skyline. Montmartre is, in a way, an open-air memory. A reminder that beauty and ruin have always kept each other's company, and maybe the Green Fairy herself is one of those ghosts, now wandering unseen between the cobblestones, brushing your sleeve as you pass. She doesn't need her bottle anymore. Her myth is soaked into the walls. Her laughter, that wild, glittering kind that once echoed through cafes, is softer now. But it's still there, folded into the hum of the city. You stop at a small overlook, where the rooftops of Paris stretch endlessly below, each window glowing like a flicker of some dream still alive. You can almost see her there, dancing over the tiles, translucent, amused, and perfectly at home. The Green Fairy's era of scandal has passed, but her ghosts remain, reminding you that the boundary between art and madness, between beauty and destruction, was never meant to be clear. Montmartre was her stage, her church, and her final resting place. And if you stand quietly enough, she might still whisper in your ear, not a warning, not a curse, but an invitation. Drink deeply, live strangely, leave something beautiful behind. The wind rises, carrying the smell of rain and crushed herbs. You descend the hill, the cobblestones slick underfoot, the city humming softly around you. Somewhere faintly you think you hear a laugh, the kind that belongs to someone who knows a secret and ice and tea in a hurry to tell it. I am. And as you reach the bottom where the hill meets the wide boulevards of modern Paris, you feel it, that same old pulse. The city changes, the laws change, the fashions fade, but the spirit that once drank with ghosts still lingers. Dawn comes to Paris like a sigh-soft, pale, and half-reluctant. The light slides across the rooftops of Montmartre, dips into the narrow streets, and eventually finds its way into a quiet laboratory where the ghosts of last nights. Dreams dissolve into something more precise. Glassware notes and a faint scent of alcohol and herbs. You're standing in one of those rooms now, not a painter's studio this time, but a chemist's domain. The benches are lined with bottles labeled in elegant handwriting: Artemisia, Absinthium, Pimpinella, Anisom, Phoeniculum, Vulgare, Wormwood, Anise, Fennel. The trinity of the green fairy's recipe. Looks romantic in the soft morning light, but this is not art. This is inquiry. The age of mystery has given way to the age of measurement. You watch as a drop of clear liquid falls into a beaker of green. It blooms into milky white. That same louche transformation that once seemed like sorcery. But now it's chemistry. Explainable, repeatable, tamed. The green fairy, dissected by science. And yet, you can't quite shake the feeling that even science is a little enchanted here. The old myth said absinthe caused hallucinations, that its devotees saw visions, went mad, or found themselves in trances of divine inspiration. The truth, as modern chemists discovered, is more banal and, paradoxically, more beautiful. The key lies in the way wormwood's compound thujone interacts with the brain, not in a fiery, dramatic way, but in subtle nudges. It binds faintly to the same receptors affected by certain tranquilizers. In high enough doses, it could agitate. In reality, it merely tingled. The real culprit behind the madness? The same thing that haunted gin and wine and brandy alike, ethanol. Simple, ancient, familiar alcohol. But absinthe is ritual. The slow drip of water, the sugar melting like morning frost, made drinking it an act of focus. You didn't gulp absinthe. You waited for it. That patience, that ceremony, shaped the intoxication into something almost hypnotic. Science, of course, loves to weigh, label, and sterilize such magic. Researchers today can recreate 19th century absinthes exactly. They test their contents, distill their myth into milligrams. And yet, when they raise the glass to their lips, even the most rational minds pause at that first curl of aroma. There's something alive in it, that impossible mix of earth, herb, and memory. You inhale. The scent is cool and medicinal at first, like the promise of clarity. Then the sweetness arrives, soft and floral, with a bitter edge that feels like honesty. Even knowing the formula doesn't make it less mysterious. That's the thing about the green fairy. She was never entirely chemical. She lived in the minds of those who drank her, in the rooms that filled with talk and art and laughter. Her spell wasn't cast by thujone or ethanol, but by mood, by context, by longing. She was a placebo of poetry, and yet what's more powerful than that? Science can measure potency, but not beauty. It can explain hallucination, but not imagination. And imagination was always absinthe's true intoxicant. It turned shabby rooms into salons, loneliness into genius, and poverty into art. Still, there's comfort in understanding. The myth of absinthe madness served its purpose once, a moral fable for a jittery world afraid of excess. But knowing the truth allows you to see it with new eyes. To appreciate it not as danger, but as craftsmanship. The old distillers were part scientists, part alchemists, balancing bitterness and perfume with near-religious precision. You picture one of them, a bearded man in a linen apron, standing before a copper still. Steam rises around him, the scent of By now, the day has fully claimed Paris. The pale blue light of morning has warmed into gold. Glancing off cafe windows, turning every surface from wrought iron to rain puddle into a mirror of movement. The clatter of dishes, the perfume of coffee, the hum of conversation, all the small, repetitive symphonies of life returning. You sit at a cafe table, a perfectly ordinary one, beneath an awning striped in red and cream. The green fairy's shadow lingers here too, though she's traded her scandal for subtlety. On the table beside the espresso cups sits a glass, not the old bulbous one, but a modern version, sleeker, gentler. The absinthe inside glows faintly like a memory you can almost taste. You add the water slowly, the ritual preserved out of respect rather than superstition. The liquid clouds then clears, and as the transformation unfolds, it feels less like alchemy and more like understanding, the kind that comes when history has had enough time to breathe. Absinthe's story, you realize, is not just about intoxication or prohibition. It's about what people fear, what they crave, and what they choose to blame when both get out of hand. It's a mirror, green and mercurial, showing how societies project their anxieties onto their pleasures. The 19th century blamed absinthe for its unrest, its violence, its madness. But perhaps it wasn't the drink that was dangerous. Perhaps it was the mirror itself. The green fairy merely reflected what was already fermenting beneath the surface: class tension, exhaustion, artistic disillusionment. She was a convenient scapegoat for the fever dreams of modern life. It's a pattern that repeats, doesn't it? Every age has its forbidden elixir: gin, opium, jazz, television, the internet. Each generation invents a new monster and dresses it in whatever frightens them most: moral decay, foreign influence, youth rebellion, addiction. And then years later, the monster becomes a museum piece. The thing that once symbolized ruin becomes a badge of nostalgia. You swirl your glass, watching the light play through it like a captured fog. The lesson feels clear. If quiet, fear distorts, art redeems, and time forgives. The green fairy teaches patience not only in her preparation, but in her history. She reminds you that excess and beauty often share the same table, that danger and art sometimes pour from the same bottle. What matters is not the myth, but the meaning it leaves behind. You imagine one of those old Belle Époque drinkers sitting here beside you, perhaps a painter, his hands still stained with pigment. He'd have looked into his glass and seen the promise of inspiration, maybe even redemption. You look into yours and see a story of caution, curiosity, and the human talent for turning vices into rituals. It's strange how something once feared as madness now seems so gentle, but that's the gift of distance. History ferments into metaphor, its bitterness mellowed by perspective. We can sip it slowly now without panic. The waiter passes by and smiles. "Una otra?" he asks. "Another?" You shake your head. Once is enough. You've tasted the myth, and what lingers isn't intoxication but reflection. The green fairy has outlasted her trial, her ban, her scandal. She's become a teacher of sorts, not through lectures, but through persistence. Lesson is simple. Everything we outlaw, misunderstand, or exaggerate tells us something about who we are at the time. What we worship, what we fear, and how easily the two blur. The ice melts. The last of the louche fades to clear. You watch it quietly, the same way you might watch a candle burn down. A small, private ritual of gratitude, not for the drink, but for the story inside it. Across the street, a young couple shares a croissant. A man tunes a guitar. Life continues, untroubled by the ghosts of scandal. Yet somehow, knowing the story makes the scene feel richer, more layered. The city, like the drink, holds more than one truth at once: sweet and bitter, ordinary and enchanted. You take a final sip. The taste is delicate now, more suggestion than flavor. You set the glass down carefully, as though it still contains something fragile. Maybe it does. The green fairy's spell has changed over the years, distilled not in copper stills, but in memory. And if she whispers anything now, it's not madness or temptation, but perspective. Every age has its intoxications. Every passion carries a price. Every story, in the end, is just another glass emptied, leaving behind the faint perfume of what once was. As the sun climbs higher and the clinking of morning turns to the bustle of day, you rise, leaving a small ring of condensation on the table, proof that something was here. By evening, Paris remembers how to glow. The city's day-bright chatter dims into a golden hush. Shop shutters clatter down. Cafe lights grow softer, and somewhere down a narrow street, a violin begins to practice something wistful. The Seine moves like a slow thought beneath its bridges, and the wind carries the faint scent of rain and old perfume. The green fairy has retreated for the night. The glasses are washed, the last cafes emptying of their stragglers. And above it all, Montmartre perches quiet now, watching its own reflection in memory. You walk home through the warm dusk. Every footstep on the cobblestones feels like an echo of another century. Paris has seen so many midnights, so many loves, revolutions, and regrets, that it wears fatigue beautifully.
No?
Even its tiredness has texture, that peculiar softness that comes when a city exhales. A soft breeze rises, tugging faintly at your coat. The old posters for cabarets, the curling paint on cafe doors, the ivy that creeps around shutters, all of it glimmers in that in-between light where nostalgia feels like reality. The ghosts of the Belle Époque no longer haunt these streets with the restless energy of artists and drinkers. Now they drift more slowly, like dust motes in lamplight. Content, perhaps, that their story has been told enough times to finally rest. You pause at a corner where once a century ago, people argued about art or politics or the best ratio of water to absinthe. Now it's just a quiet intersection where a bakery locks up for the night. You imagine the smell of anise and smoke that used to linger here, replaced now by yeast, by croissants, by comfort. The city has grown gentler. There's a certain grace in that. Paris has always had a complicated relationship with its past. It worships it, markets it, sometimes even impersonates it. But when the tourists leave and the river stills, the real city comes out quieter, a little worn, but endlessly patient. The city that endured wars, bans, exiles, and reinventions finally gives itself permission to sleep. And in that silence, the Green Fairy herself seems to rest too. She no longer flits through cafes or whispers in artists' ears. Her glass is empty, her scandals long forgiven. But her presence lingers, not a spirit or ghost, but as a feeling. The feeling that even beauty once feared can find peace if given enough time. You sit on a stone ledge overlooking the river. The lamps along the quays ripple in the water like ribbons of gold. Across the way, Notre Dame, scarred but steadfast, stands in half shadow. The faint hum of a passing car sounds almost like the purr of a cat, somewhere a late train sighs. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint clink of glass, a spoon turning in a cup, a long-forgotten laugh. It's not loud, just there, woven into the night like a hidden chord. You think of all the people who once found themselves in the same city under the same stars, painters with wild eyes, writers who mistook melancholy for muse, dreamers chasing colors that didn't exist yet. The Green Fairy may have guided them toward brilliance or ruin or both. But tonight, all of them, the restless, the drunk, the devoted, seem to sleep at last. Even the sane moves slower now, heavy with reflection. The scent of wormwood and smoke has faded, placed by something simpler. The metallic cool of evening air, the faint sweetness of chestnut trees. It's the smell of a city that has stopped rushing to forget itself. You take a breath. Coolness fills you, settles you, for all the talk of madness and magic. What Absinthe truly gave people was pause, a chance to stop, to dream, to blur the edges between the possible and the imagined. And that's still here, even without the glass. The spell has softened, but it remains. The lights on the river flicker. One by one, windows darken. Paris curls inward, tucking itself beneath its own history like a blanket. Even the ghosts, perhaps, grow sleepy. And you, standing in the same streets that once rang with laughter and scandal, feel a strange tenderness. The fairy, the madness, the fear, the art. It was all just the city learning itself through its most chaotic mirror. Now it rests. The spell is complete. You turn toward home. The stones are warm from the day. Street lamp hums quietly above. Somewhere a cat slips through an alleyway, indifferent to all of it. Paris finally sleeps again. Not because it is tired, but because it has earned its rest. And as you walk away, the night folds gently around you. So here we are, at the end of our little drift through time, a quiet journey that began in the flicker of a green glass and now fades gently into sleep. Paris, the restless muse of centuries, has finally dimmed her lights. The cafes are empty. The bottles are clean. And somewhere far down the Seine, the last ripples of the Green Fairy dissolve into the dark. You might almost miss her if you were in tea looking for her, that shimmer in the corner of the eye, that soft scent of anise when no one's around. The truth is she never really left. Absinthe's myth was never just about the drink. was about imagination, the human need to find enchantment, even in things that make us a little dizzy. You can picture the old cafe tables where painters once argued about light, where poets scribbled on napkins, where laughter and heartbreak shared a glass. You can almost hear the clink of spoons and the hiss of fountains, the faint chaos of creation and progress. And yet time has folded over it all like a warm blanket. The clamor has softened to a hum. The fairy's wings are folded now, her work complete. What remains is a lesson whispered softly across the centuries. Every age has its green fairy, that dangerous little muse that blurs the line between art and escape, between dream and delusion. Sometimes it comes in a bottle, sometimes in a screen, sometimes in the endless scroll of our own thoughts. It tempts you to stay awake, to see more, to feel more, until you forget that peace can be just as intoxicating. The artists and wanderers of old Paris learned that the hard way. They painted the impossible, they wrote the unthinkable, they lived like candles burning at both ends. And when the flame went out, what was left wasn't ruin, it was art. Something fragile and eternal that outlived even the myth that made it. That's the quiet secret of the Green Fairy's legacy. She wasn't destruction. She was transformation, the messy, beautiful process of turning chaos into meaning. And like any good story, hers ends not with a bang, but with a sigh. You can almost imagine her, perched on the rim of a forgotten glass somewhere, smiling faintly at her own legend. The scandal, the bans, the whispered fears, all of it part of the same long lullaby that history hums to itself before falling asleep again. Outside, Paris has long gone still. The rain has stopped. The cobblestones gleam. Some